I have been at PAM for 22 years, and I was actually hired to come to be the director. I know a lot of people don't come to Cape Cod for a job. I think I was probably one of the only few, but I actually was working in Boston at the Institute of Contemporary Art. It was 2000, and I guess it was either 2000 or 2000, must have been 2001. And someone emailed me the job description for the director position at the Provincetown Art Association Museum. But it was really about the history of Provincetown, and what really cinched it for me is that when I went for my interview, I was put up at a board member's house, and she grew up in Provincetown and her father was the town doctor. And when I went into her house and saw like a Milton Avery on the wall that was inscribed to her father and all of this artwork, a lot of which I didn't even know who these artists were, but I knew there was something here. And I ended up staying with her for 3 nights, even though my interview was only 1 day, because I found her so amazingly fascinating, and she really told me what Provincetown was all about. Like the history of the art colony, how this was the oldest continuous art colony in America, and that whole legacy piece really hooked me in, because I'd be honest, other than the major players like Robert Motherwell and Helen Frankenthaler and Jackson Pollock, I didn't really know a lot of the early Provincetown artists, especially the ones that had come to found the organization in 1914, but that was what really hooked me in. That's the collection has really become this core of not only our mission, but it links the art association piece, which is if you are a member of the museum, you get to show your artwork. So we have over 800 artists that show with us on a contemporary basis, on an annual basis. These artists are still inspired by the early artists that came here, and in retrospect, if you think about it, 70% of Provincetown is the National Seashore, which is protected through the good work of President John F. Kennedy. So if that landscape is only changed because of erosion and Mother Nature, what someone looked at 100 years ago, an artist today is still inspired by. And I think that's really key to why artists still come to Provincetown. And we always get like, well, everybody says it's because of the light. What do you mean? And my answer is you need to come here and see it for yourself, because the light changes 365 days a year. These brilliant oranges and pinks, and it's this light that is mesmerizing, and then you realize why people want to come and paint that. What the building represents is really truer to the mission than anything. It's preserving the historic past, but promoting the future. And the fact that the 2 main schools of art that flow through PAM are the Hawthorne School and the Hoffman School, traditional, abstract. So we married the 2, and it made them uncomfortable, intense. And when I curate shows, I love to put something from like 1930 next to something from 1950. And I think that the tension creates a much better exhibition. It it forces you to think a little bit more about the trajectories that people were going, how modern art was changing the art world with the Armory show in 1913 with Marcel Duchamp's The Nude Descending the Staircase. That blew the art world out of the water. And I think that we represent so many of the isms, from Impressionism to Post-Impressionism to Abstract Expressionism to Modernism, etc., that needs to happen. Additionally, there's a restaurant in Provincetown called Nappy's, and Nappy Van Derrick, who was the proprietor for decades, he passed away on Christmas Day, I think in 2018, and his collection, over 300 works, starts in the late probably 1890s through about 1940. We're in the process of getting about 250 of those works to the PAM collection, which is a lot of artists that came to study in Provincetown but didn't necessarily stay in Provincetown. A lot of women artists, amazing. And a lot of them came from Chicago. They came from other parts of the United States to come and study in Provincetown. So now we have this incredible body of work that really, again, fills in gaps of people that might have just come through or stayed for a little bit or come for summers and not necessarily lived there. And I think the school is a big piece of that. So we've always had a school. When Hawthorne opened his school, the reason it's the oldest continuous art colony in America is when Hawthorne opened his Cape Cod School of Art, that school still continues. It continues obviously under different leadership, but that school has never stopped. So the continuum of that school is why we're coined the oldest continuous art colony. And at one point, I think it was in 1916, there were 5 schools of art in Provincetown. So it's always been a destination for artists to come to learn and to teach. And we have carried that legacy on, but also COVID forced us to really get our digital house in order. So now we're doing hybrid classes, we're doing online classes. We have artists that are teaching from all over the place. So we really try to stay true to these Hawthorne and Hoffman ideals, but we have teachers doing all kinds of things, but the fact that they're using the collection, using the landscape, plein air classes still happen all the time with people outside, whether it's on our property or out on the beach or wherever, painting the landscape of Provincetown. That still continues. But I think that that's really what draws people in, and the continuum goes because people are still coming here to take classes, being inspired by what artists were inspired by hundreds of years or 100 plus years ago, and the opportunity to be able to take a class either in person or online, even though the in-person I believe is better, draws you to Provincetown. And I think there's still that draw to come out of, a lot of it is out of curiosity, a lot of it is out of studying with a specific instructor, but I think the ideals are still there in terms of getting people to come to Provincetown to practice and continue. And we do see a lot of cycles where people will come, they'll stay for a little bit, they'll leave, but somehow people always come back. They always come back, whether they're a visitor maybe or a vacationer, but they're still connected. And the good part about us is that you can be a member of PAM from wherever you live. You don't have to live in Provincetown, but true to our mission, which is showing works of art, all branches of art, we stay true to that, and it really hasn't changed since 1921, where we want to be a source of inspiration for anybody who wants to come and be creative in Provincetown. And the other great thing about Provincetown is that it's not just visual art. There's writing, there's music, there's poetry, there's films, there's everything. I mean, any kind of creative drumming, singing in the street, playing your violin, whatever. And think about the entertainment in Provincetown with drag queens and performers. It's really jam-packed. You can get bowled over by creativity in this community, and I think that's why people keep coming back. Well, interestingly and not surprisingly, when I started, because I was young, I was 34, I used to get, did you even graduate from high school yet? And I'm like, yes, I did, as a matter of fact. You know, I think it was more of ageism was the first kind of hurdle. And then once we got the building built, and it was really happening come hell or high water, whether people wanted it to or not, I think people respected my leadership. And so I think I've always been respected as a leader. The fact that I'm a woman, you know, I definitely had my struggles with, you know, some men who thought they knew more than I did, and maybe they did, but I'm very stubborn. I'm Italian. I don't really listen to too many people. But now the leadership at PAM, we also have a woman who's our board president as well. So, and the majority of my staff are women. I think the makeup of instructors is probably pretty good, like 50-50, but we really have a very women-centric staff and board, especially because our leadership is Lise Motherwell, who's our board president. And the other thing about collecting, we've really made concerted efforts, I'd say in the last, I don't know, 5 to 7 years to bring in more women artists and more artists of color into the collection. There really weren't a lot of artists of color that we know of who spent a lot of time in Provincetown, but those who did, we've made efforts to get works of theirs in the collection, exhibitions, and we still, and now that we have, through our membership, there are a lot more artists of color. And of course, the LGBTQ community is very well represented within not only the collection, but within the staff and board as well. I'd say that, and for me too, total learning curve is Blanche Lozelle. So when I started at PAM, in 2001, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston was doing a major exhibition called From Paris to Provincetown, Blanche Lozelle and the White Line Woodblock Print. And I was like, who is this Blanche Lozelle? And we had some of her work in our collection and a lot of archival information because she spent many, many summers in Provincetown, but we didn't really have a lot of her artwork. And these are the White Line Woodblock prints, which is called the Provincetown print, which was a group of women printmakers. There was Nordfeld, who was male, but the rest of them were women, who spearheaded this initiative to basically transform multi-block processes based on Japanese printmaking to a single block process, water-based. You're carving on a block backwards. The image has to be carved backwards, which my brain doesn't really function that way, but watching artists do that to me is completely fascinating. But not only did she do that, she studied with Hawthorne, but she also studied with Hans Hofmann. So she has these powerful abstract paintings that she did well. So Blanche was like very quiet. She apparently was hard of hearing. If you look at pictures of her, she kind of looks very meek, but when you look at her body of work, it is so powerful. So we got invited to the opening of the Blanche Lozelle show in Boston, and it got me thinking, why is this exhibition not in Provincetown? And I already knew the answer to that because our building wasn't up to code, but it was a dream to get the Blanche Lozelle exhibition back, and in 2025, a major Blanche Lozelle exhibition will be at PAM. It's part of a traveling initiative, and we will be able to showcase so much more because since the MFA did that show, now Blanche Lozelle in the art world is known as one of the greatest printmakers of all time, not to mention the other works that she did, and we'll be able to showcase that. So I'm super excited about that. And Helen Frankenthaler too. I mean, she was married to Robert Motherwell. She was in Provincetown for a decade, and when they were divorced, she went back to the Hamptons. She was done with Provincetown for the most part. But when we did her show in 2018, it was interesting because the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation said, this is the decade that we know the least about. And luckily, there were enough people around who actually knew Helen Frankenthaler and could tell stories about a dinner party or this kind of thing. And so I think this exhibition personalized her more than just Helen Frankenthaler, this incredible Abex women artist who used this soak stain method of making art. It really put her life into perspective of a decade in Provincetown. And I think, and I know, we showed canvases that had literally been rolled since she left Provincetown in like 1970 and never been shown again. We were able to get these stretched, framed, and into the museum. So that was really record-breaking, groundbreaking, so many record-breaking things with Helen Frankenthaler, and it did travel to the Parrish Art Museum in the Hamptons, but the Provincetown show was just, it opened a lot of people's eyes in terms of how a female abstract artist was as powerful as the male counterparts. A lot of women Abex artists would change their names or just use their initials so that they weren't called out as a female artist, because then their work wouldn't be shown or seen as much as male artists. There's a whole story about that, but the idea that we were able to have this massive exhibition of Helen's was great. So that's another artist that that was an exhibition that was really truly groundbreaking for us. And there are so many more, because there are so many artists that came through Provincetown, and I would say the majority of the exhibitions that we do show are artists that people have never heard of before. Like, we'll do the Blockbuster show, every few years, but the majority of the exhibitions that we have are artists that people have never even heard about. And that's why it's so important for us to get people in the doors, because it's a small museum. If you're coming there to see like the Hopper collection, because we have a big Hopper collection, you're going to walk around and see everything else. And I think that's what's really key. And I think another really important thing to note is that if you are a contemporary artist showing at PAM, at any given time, there's going to be a Helen Frankenthaler or an Edward Hopper or a Hans Hofmann or Blanche Lozelle hanging in the museum alongside. And I think that's really kind of cool that you are immersed in this art colony, in this art association piece, which is still a major part of our mission. And I think that we're a very unique model in that we're a school, a museum, and an art association. All of the pieces kind of flow together, and it makes us for a unique model, and there aren't many cultural organizations that have this model like us. So I think it's really important. For us, it's if you've connected with Cape Cod, I don't care if you were here a weekend or your whole life, if you've connected and your art is inspired by something that you experienced on the Cape, then I believe that you count as a Cape Cod artist. I think that the larger that pool is, the better it is for everybody, because I think that, it's interesting, there's an artist, his name was Houghton Cranford Smith, and he was a student of Charles Hawthorne. He was only in Provincetown from, I think, probably the late when Hawthorne opened his school in 1899, I think the early 1900s, he was maybe in Provincetown for a few years. Then he ended up traveling to Bermuda, and he went all over the world and all over the country, and he ended up he was taught at Cannes, Kansas for a while. His family ended up in New Jersey. Well, he was still making paintings of Provincetown in the 60s and 70s, even though he never returned, because it stuck so heavily in his mind. And so in our collection, we have over 100 works by him, because his daughter, it was so funny, when we finished building the museum, the Boston Globe actually gave us a really good review of the museum. She called me and she said, "You don't know me, but I've been watching you and I've been waiting for this, because my father was Houghton Cranford Smith, and I have a bunch of his artwork, and I wasn't going to leave it to the museum until it was up to par," which it is. I went to New York, you know, I saw this warehouse full of work. She had pre-selected this collection for us, and it was work that he did in Provincetown all the way through his entire career, of how he kept coming back to Provincetown from the early 1900s all the way to the 60s. And the later paintings are definitely from his mind, because he takes a lot of license in terms of the landscape and all that kind of stuff, but they're fabulous. And so in my mind, that's a great example of someone who was inspired by Provincetown and kept it their entire career. So that's how I kind of coin it. I think it's important to note that Provincetown is surrounded by water on 3 sides. The early industries in Provincetown were fishing. Fishing village is what it was always coined. And we still have a fishing fleet. It's diminishing, but it still exists. And one of many of the topics of paintings or prints or drawings are fishing boats, the pier with boats. And one of the beautiful things about the Nappy Van Dera collection is that Nappy was a sailor. He was always a sailor. And so a lot of the paintings that we have are of maritime ships. The Rose Dorothea, which the replica of that is in the library in Provincetown, like literally in the middle of the library. But we do have a lot of boats and fishermen and maritime folks, shell fishermen. The aquaculture industry is definitely boomed in Provincetown. Those are all documented. And the really great thing are that we now have a lot of contemporary artists that are using marine debris, ropes, plastic, things that they're finding on the beaches or in the waters to create artwork to make a statement about how we need to keep our waters clean. And again, if you come into any of our member shows, guaranteed you will see some type of art that constitutes the consciousness that we should all be aware of how we need to keep our beaches and our waters clean.